the distinction with a religious morality is that it adds something to that it adds something beyond, at the very least, the material. We'll get to God as a being later on. And so so I'll start with that. Second, I wasn't trying to say, because I certainly don't think that anyone here believes that any of the horrible stuff I said is justifiable. I'm only saying that because of religion, some people found it justifiable, or at least use that as an excuse to justify their actions. A lot of religious people disagree with that. That goes without saying. But it is only through having something like religion, something that transcends humanity, or at least professes to, in some people's interpretations, that you can do these heinous acts and make this argument that what you're doing is good. I think we saw something like that in Game of Thrones as well, without it being about religion.
Well, that's a good point. It doesn't necessarily require religion.
Oh, we could do a whole in-depth discussion of it, but we're not going to go there. Regarding destruction of nature, just very briefly, I came to uni studying environmental management, just about to finish, yay me. We talked about breaking a rock as being something immoral, but I think that's also something that we do every day as we walk along a gravel path and rocks are crunching and cracking beneath our feet, and we don't give any second thought to it. I think the kind of wanton destruction of nature can be considered immoral because of the effects, like you say, that it has not just on humanity, but on the ibis, on the magpie, and all the other wildlife that's out there, as well as the impact it has on us when we go to a national park and all the trees are chopped down. It's incredibly depressing. I think destruction of nature does have an impact on sentient beings, far greater than humanity. Oftentimes throughout my talk, I talk about humanity. It's just really clunky to say sentient beings all the time. And I think humanity appeals to the most people. Motivation being do it because I want to do it. I think that's the only pure motivation. You were touching on the same thing about being motivated by greed and stuff like that. It was much the same as the honest shopkeeper example that I gave. These are not pure motivations, and although it might seem daunting to say that there isn't really a motivation to do good, you can have laws and social reward and stuff like that, so you can have motivations, but that these don't motivate moral character. I think that speaks to what we mean by the word character. Character is something that exists within us and exists beyond sort of influence, that is sort of at the core of our being. And so I don't think you can sort of talk to motivation being something that can change character. I think character is something that goes beyond that. And lastly, God as a being. I understand that sort of argument. However, I'm not really sure that God, and this would be my atheist sort of position speaking, but even if you have the idea of God, I'm not sure that he is relevant in the same way that if I get into a fight with someone here, it doesn't affect my cousin in England. Like, it simply has, he is not morally relevant, not because he's not a morally relevant being, he's not morally relevant to that action, or basically anything I do in Australia, almost, because he's just not involved in that action. There is very minimal consequence upon him, and I would find it quite odd to think that my actions could have a significant impact on God's well-being. Yeah.
I'm going to let Dan have 30 seconds and then I'm going to move us on.
Thanks. 30 seconds, 3 responses. The first is that your last set of statements there just undermined your critique of religion, right? Like, if God isn't morally relevant, then why does Abraham offer up his child as a sacrifice to him? Like, clearly, God is morally relevant to the actions of a whole bunch of people throughout history. You may say that they're operating under a delusion there, but at least if you just look at their actions, you have to say God is a very morally relevant being, and you've accused religion of being moral, of building on that fact in really heinous kinds of ways, right? So the point, I think, for those of us who come from a theistic background is that God is highly morally relevant, even to the extent that we would, if God called us to give up our lives for him. And then the only justification for that, I think, and you're right to push us on it, that was by far, I thought, the strongest point of your critique. The only justification for that is that if God is fundamentally good himself and has the interests of humanity at his heart, right? Like, otherwise, yeah, we're just sacrificing ourselves for a monster. So that would be my kind of response to your third one. The second kind of point about motivation, again, I think is you're just making circular statements based on a pretty average argument by Kant, which fails to describe the way that people actually live, right? Like, if things like fear and reward and punishment and love for another person, because I act because I want them, if those are not relevant to morality, then there's not much left to talk about in morality, is there, right? And I think that's been the critique of Kant's position ever since that point. Well, but then you define character as acting without motivation, right? Like, I act purely because I want to act. Like, it's a completely empty set, right? Like, well, what is self-motivation if it's
Okay,
if
finishing
devoid of
up.
reasons?
Finishing up.
Sorry, I'll leave it there.
It's a very long 30 seconds. We're going to open up questions to you guys in a second, but I want to ask mine first because I've got the microphone and that's the way it works. My question is, you've been all talking a lot about goodness, at least to some extent, being how we relate to other people and how we relate to the physical world. Should we, as humanity, be aiming for a world in which we are all good people? And if so, how should we be going about pursuing that goal? Who wants to go first? Go, Dan.
Okay, no, I just finish off.
Should we all be aiming to be good people?
Well, it's not a world.
Well, I would think that all four of us would say yes, of course. We should be aiming to inspire goodness and creating a world full of good people. I would argue that people are inherently good, and therefore that is already the reality, and people's actions change them away from that. The only issue is that from my opinion, on the views on the panel would say that goodness can only come in certain ways, and therefore not everyone can attain good. Thomas would say that religion inherently can't be good, or people who practice religions with the motivations only to do God's will could not be good. I would argue, Dan, that you, and I don't know if you intended to say this, but you, at the beginning you said that people that do God's deeds that's the way in which they can become good, which would therefore exclude someone like Thomas and perhaps even someone like me. And that's actually been the cause of a lot of religious strife for thousands of years, the placing of blame by one religion on another religion, which has led to the decimation of actually decimation of both of our religions by the Catholic Church through the Inquisitions and a whole lot of other stuff. The way in which some members of Islam have taken different teachings upon themselves to go out and cause harm and real horrors within the world, both against the West, against Christianity, against Judaism, against a lot of different people. And we've seen it time and time again in the name of Islam, even if it's not how you believe Islam is, would mean that we cannot be good. And so I suppose for me this question, if we're not able to come to an agreement of what is universal morality, then perhaps we would all be unable to say that actually we can attain universal goodness.
Thank you, brother. Charles, thank you very much. I agree with you 100%, and I think everyone would love a world where everyone is good, but unfortunately, going back to my brother's point, it comes down to people's perspective, really, how they view religion, and how they even view how to conduct themselves in society. And everyone has a different thought process. Not everyone is the same. And, you know, unfortunately, like you said, people do things in Islam in the name of Islam, and They think this is what Islam preaches, this is what Islam teaches, to go out and to kill people and under the name of religion. That happens in Christianity, that happens also in Judaism. You know, what's happening overseas, we find that the mass killings that are happening to Muslims and to non-Muslims as well, it comes down to people who view religion as a platform of war, or a reasoning for war, or unjustified war, pretty much. So I think 100% we would love a world without war and a world full of good people. But unfortunately, it comes down to people's perception, the way they perceive things, and the way they interpret things into their own understanding. That's my take on it.
So the question posed was, should we aim to be good and how? And I think for me the problem is if there is a reason to be good beyond I do good because I want to do good. Sorry, Dan. I think that fundamentally undermines what it means to be good, because then you're not aiming to do good. You're acting in accordance to that motivation, to the extent that that motivation changes your action. So I think what we should really be focusing on doing is how do we maximize the good inside people. For me, I came here and started doing, so before I was working as a bakery manager at Coles for a few years, and I sort of got bored with that, and I decided to go to uni, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And through listening to a podcast, actually, that I ended up deciding on doing environmental management, because that podcast helped me understand the connection between people and the environment, people and animals and stuff like that. And I've seen the same sort of thing happen in my sister who turned vegan last year, or year before actually, longer than I thought now. And it was seeing videos about what happened to animals and stuff like that acted on her empathy. And I think it's empathy that is the kind of good characteristic, the good character that's within people. And I think we need to try and maximize that.
Can I just ask you a question? Because you made a fundamental flaw, I think. Because what you've done is you've accused us. No, I'm not trying to jump at you, but you've insinuated that because our goodness, our ability, our desire to be good is motivated by God, that was wrong, correct?
I mean, just then I was talking more generally.
No, but motivation of, yes? I'm saying, was that a correct statement before?
Motivation by God could be motivation by duty, by fear, by...
and the motivation that you got from this
heaven
podcast? No, I'm serious.
No.
Are you not allowed to be motivated to be good?
No, you are allowed to be motivated to be good, but it has to come from within. So what the podcast did is I had empathy, however, because I don't necessarily interact with animals or I didn't have a very good understanding of humans' impact with environment and stuff like that, revealing that knowledge sort of awoken that empathy within me. I wasn't motivated to do good suddenly because I want the environment to be a better place for me or whatever. It's not a selfish thing. It's still because I had a caring that was previously unacted upon.
So I believe that I was fundamentally born moral, and I believe that I, as a child, wanted to help people, but the commands of my religion allowed me different avenues to motivate me to take that inherent goodness and to apply that to the world. So I'm not sure what the difference is between us.
That's what I was getting to.
So we're actually the same.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
I'll make my point and then you'll see. So I like to think we were all born moral. I know some of the Christian views are not necessarily that we're born moral, that we're broken and need sort of fixing. But whatever whatever it is that sort of maximizes that empathy for you, and religion certainly can do that. This idea that everything is God's creation, so we're all united by that, is something that Dan particularly spoke to. But everyone spoke about how God can sort of unify everyone. And I certainly think that's true. I also think having an understanding of environment can do that, getting out and meeting new people. I think interfaith dialogues can help that, because you realize that there are other people they've got differing views, but they're still people just like you. The flip side of that coin, as many of you have acknowledged, is also that religion can and has been used to divide people in the past. Whatever it is that helps sort of maximize your empathy is great, and I think we should be trying to do that, and I think we should be trying to come together and see past whatever it is, whatever differences it is that we have. I just don't think you need God to do that.